Carrie Lauer, thank you so much for being with us, joining our Summer Connect family. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you're doing right now in your ministry where you're located?
I did work in New York City with recent college graduates. That was a blast. I loved it. And I got married, so I moved to New Jersey for love.
Oh,
My
congratulations.
husband, yes, lives in New Jersey. I thought it would be good to live with him.
Yeah.
So this year I've been transitioning to kind of decoding New Jersey and where I live. And I've found that the immigrant communities are really rich and open. And so I'm going to be involved in helping teach English to immigrant communities with Cru City. And I'll also lead nationally in some roles with Cru City as well.
Okay, great. But you have a rich history with the campus ministry as
I
well.
do.
Where were you
Yes,
initially?
I love the campus ministry. I graduated from Miami of Ohio. Jesus changed my life as a student there.
Okay.
I worked among the Buckeyes at Ohio State for 15 years, which was a delight. And then I worked out of Orlando with the executive team in the campus ministry for almost 10 years before I moved to New York City.
That's great. Well, it's exciting, the new changes in your life.
Yes.
So tonight, you're going to talk to us about vulnerability and going along with that, the need for grace and truth in our lives. So one of the things that we want to communicate to our Summer Connect audience is that they experience grace and truth because we want them to have their summer be not just like a normal summer that they spend. We want them to make it count and invest it. And so why don't you talk a little bit about grace and truth and vulnerability, why they're so important, and how they transform a community of people centered on Jesus.
Well, Shelby, you know we're really all about relationships. That's what we're made for. God's made us to be in relationship with himself and others. And it's grace and truth and vulnerability that allows us to be in the kind of authentic relationships we're created for. So grace allows us to be fully seen, fully known, all of us, the good, bad, and ugly, and be fully accepted. Truth calls us up to really be free of addiction, free of bondage, free to be who we are as image bearers and as children of God. And it's really the vulnerability that we walk into community where we have the courage to be honest, both about our needs and our struggles and about what we have to offer. It takes a lot of courage, but it's in that grace and truth really worked out in vulnerable community that sets us free and allows us to be all that we're made to be.
Yeah. How is Jesus the key to our community being characterized by those elements you talked about, grace and truth?
He's so central. Without Jesus, it can't truly happen because it's in Jesus that he has paid for all the things that we've ever done to free us from shame so that we can be fully seen and fully accepted. Like, it's so radical when you think about in 2 Corinthians, it talks about he who knew no sin became sin on our behalf that we might become the very righteousness of God. Or in Romans 8, it talks about there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. He fully sees us and he's fully paid for everything we've done that causes shame in our life, and he fully wipes it away. And so in John chapter 1, it talks about how Jesus came full of grace and truth. And it's really a great study to walk through the book of John and see how he interacts with people in grace and truth. Like in John 4, the woman at the well, he says, go and find your husband. And she's like, I don't have a husband. He's like, actually, you've had 5.
Yeah.
And he exposes her, but she experiences a kindness and an acceptance of him that she goes to the village and goes, come meet this man that's told me everything I've ever done, which isn't true, but she feels that acceptance and being known by him. Or the woman in John 8, where she's brought out, she's caught in adultery. And Jesus, it's a great picture of grace and truth because it's a familiar story, but Jesus says, you know, those who are without sin, you cast the first stone. And he turns to her and he says, where are those that condemn you? And she said, they've gone. And he goes, neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin. So Jesus came full of grace and truth, and it's in his life and death and resurrection that we stand holy and pure and blameless, that allows us to then relate to him, being fully seen and fully accepted, and with one another without judgment. And so without him, it's impossible.
Yeah, he's the central key. Yeah. How does vulnerability play a role in all of this? Like, how is that key?
Well, you know, all of us, I think, believe a lie that in order to be accepted, I need to put my best foot forward.
Right.
Like, you can't really see this ugly part of me.
Yeah.
And yet it's just the opposite. Like, really, who we're drawn to, isn't it true, are the people that are honest about the things that they struggle with. Mm-hmm. It's like vulnerability is the universal Me Too. You know, we've had a Me Too movement where women have said, I feel safe to be honest because I resonate with this being abused or whatever.
Right.
And in Jesus, it's kind of like it allows us, vulnerability is the universal Me Too, to say, I have struggles. Mm-hmm. I don't have it together. And it's that allows us to bond. And so Brené Brown, I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she has a TED Talk on vulnerability. And she is a sociologist. She has her PhD. She has research data for the human heart to show us our need, I think, for Jesus. But she also talks about how vulnerability requires courage to share my whole story of who I am and to be honest about the things that I struggle with. Yeah. And so it's what allows community to really happen.
Yeah, I always feel drawn to people who are vulnerable. I feel like I can be vulnerable with them when they're vulnerable with me first. Yeah. So what might that look like practically as we struggle with authentic, community and wanting to be fully known?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first is to steep yourself in the reality of your relationship with Jesus, if you know Jesus, and you do. If you don't know Jesus, to discover who he is, that it's in him that we can just lay our heart bare and be honest about who we are in our struggles. And so to steep your life in scriptures about the person of Jesus and the freedom he wants to bring us in what he's done for us in his life and death and resurrection. And as you experience grace and truth, then you can be a safe person because there's a no judgment zone.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's like we're all level at the cross, right? So it's not like I can look at you and go, oh my.
Yeah.
But we experience judgment in the body of Christ. And I'm convinced it's because we don't really understand who we are in Jesus. Yeah. So as we understand more of who we are in Jesus, then I can tiptoe into safe community to say, I'm going to be honest about the things that I'm struggling with. So I often choose to eat in a way that numbs my heart. If I'm feeling sad or feeling overwhelmed or feeling scared, I watch myself want to go eat ice cream standing up in the kitchen all by myself, afraid Bob's going to come in and find me eating it. Those kind of compulsive, and it's when I see those patterns that it's really not about eating ice cream. Ice cream's neither good nor bad. It's actually delicious. I love ice cream. But it's when I'm hiding in shame to try to numb my heart that leads to destruction and isolation in community. But I have found that if I'm honest about what I'm struggling with, then I can be free of that I can go, Bob, I'm really struggling. I want to eat the house right now. Yeah. But really what I need is your affirmation. I need to tell you what I'm scared about or whatever. So when we come into community with the things we're struggling with, whether that be pornography or addiction to perfection or an addiction to social media where I'm not really living my best life because I'm in bondage. I think of a person that is very, very dear to me, and she has really struggled with depression. She attempted suicide several years ago. She's given me permission to share this story. And it was very grievous to me, and I was with her a couple months after she had attempted suicide, and she said that she had a date. Well, any woman, of course, follows that up really quickly. It's like, well, tell me more about this date. Sure. And she said, well, I said, is he a good guy? And she goes, well, I really don't date good guys. And I said, tell me more. Does he cross your boundaries? And she goes, well, I'm not sure I have any boundaries. And I explained to her, I said, this is what's true. You and I, before Jesus, are in need of his righteousness, and we're righteous only because of his grace. And I want you to know that you can tell me anything and I won't reject you. And she began to explain that in the past year, she had hooked up with about 16 different men. And she said, most of whom don't know my name. This one knows my name and he's called me back. Wow. Yeah. So I was like, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. Like, I wanted her to know that was a treasure to me, that she was that honest with me. Sure. And then I said, tell me more about the process. Like, what's the process for you? And she goes, well, I will go to a party and I will get drunk and then I'll hook up with the guy. And then I said, and then what happens? And she said, I go back to my room and I cut myself because the pain of that isolation and that vulnerability is too much to bear. Well, naturally, it broke my heart to hear that, but I was so glad that she allowed me to be an instrument of Jesus, to allow her to experience that kind of safety. And you know, Shelby, really, I think that was kind of the linchpin that unlocked a road of freedom for her. She got involved in the Celebrate Recovery, where she became a part of a Grace and Truth community and was vulnerable. And she is now happily married, walking with Jesus, 2 beautiful children. So I'm not the hero in that story. I don't tell you that to say, look what I did. Right. Jesus is the hero, and it's when we experience that kind of grace and truth, and as we choose vulnerability, that we're set free to really be who God's made us to be and live in the kind of freedom He allows us to have.
That's fantastic, because since the hookup culture is so prevalent, especially on a college campus, there are many students that understand and resonate with what you're talking about. And even if they don't resonate with it in terms of personal experience, they know someone, or they're close with many people who experience the hookup culture. And wouldn't it be great if vulnerability were a major part of that, so that people could be honest about how they're feeling in light of what they're doing, in light of what they're seeing as well. What would you want those listening in our Summer Connect audience to think about and embrace as a result of a greater understanding of grace and truth and vulnerability when it comes to their relationships?
Well, you know, Shelby, it is a journey. And so even though I've conceptually understood what Jesus has done and that I'm not condemned and there is no shame, I still have to steep myself in the reality that Jesus' life and death and resurrection, His Spirit inside of me, frees me. That there is no shame. So I would want men and women, college students listening to this, to know, if they know Jesus, He sees them, all of them, and that they don't have to hide because He has taken away all shame and condemnation. I would also want, as we experience grace, to be people that are safe. That if I'm steeped in the reality that I know that it's Jesus that has made me righteous, then I can allow others to experience that through me. And so if there are people struggling with living in the darkness, list some areas that they're really struggling with, I would say I would actually recommend that people not be vulnerable to the masses, not on social media, not stand up in your group, your weekly meeting or whatever and say, I'm struggling with this, but to ask Jesus to show you people that understand who they are in righteousness in Jesus and who they are in grace and truth. And a handful of people say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Like I am struggling to be free of these patterns of addiction in my life. I'm struggling with perfectionism. I want you to know that I don't have it together. I have chinks in my armor, and that perfectionism is an insidious lie because none of us are perfect. And so it's in those kinds of smaller communities that we experience grace and truth and vulnerability and the safety of Jesus being central in that we experience freedom. You know, I would say I have been a part of communities that are high grace and high truth and vulnerability. And it has been some of the most developmental, freeing, powerful communities I've ever been a part of. I've also been a part of and contributed to dysfunctional communities where it's difficult, where I've been judgmental or I've been too scared to be truthful with someone, either about things that I see in their life where I'm like, oh, I think they're made for more. And it's those kind of communities where I have watched men and women not be, and I have not been all that God's made me to be. And that I think the world longs for high grace, high truth, vulnerable communities of authenticity. And that if on our campuses all across the country and the world, men and women were a part of those authentic communities, I think the world would be radically changed because we really are being made more and more like Jesus, and He is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you so much for these important reminders about who Jesus is, how it's relevant to us today, and a challenge for us to be more vulnerable in that process. Thanks for being with us, Carrie.
Thank you.